First of all, welcome to the studio of InvestSight, media partner for the Agenda Forum at the Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. And would you please let our audience know what's your opinion and your idea of the usefulness of this forum at all?
Of this forum?
Yes, how do you find it?
I've only been here for half a day,
Yes.
and I found this 3 sessions I've been to very useful. I'm astonished at the number of people are at this forum. I go to lots of conferences. Most of them are much smaller than this one, with many parallel sessions which compete for one's attention, because each one of us has only so many hours in a day. And there must have been, I don't know, 16 or 18 sessions so far today, and I've just been to 3 of them.
All right. This forum and its participants, they focus their attention on major economic problems of this country and the world in general. What are the major problems, in your view? What are we going to confront in the very near future?
Depends on what you mean by the very near future.
Well, I mean, a couple of years.
So climate change
Yes.
is a big issue, but not in the near future, in my view. We see it coming, and we have decades to respond to it and to mitigate it. So we need to get started, but it's not an immediate issue in that sense, if you mean by near the next 1 or 2 years, for example. I think we have a big problem with Iran, between the United States especially and Iran, and that needs to be resolved within the next 6 months. It will not be resolved forever, but it needs to be managed well. We have a big problem between the United States and China on trade issues. That phase 1, as so-called, has been resolved, but does not settle the issues. I'm assuming that Trump wants to get it to after the election. He's assuming he will be reelected, and if he's not reelected, the problem will not go away, but the tone will change quite a bit. So that's an immediate issue. The U.S. economy is fully employed and performing very well at the present time. Inflation is low, unemployment is low, but other economies around the world have been slowing down. And so that's a problem, not so much for the U.S., but for the rest of the world. Of course, it affects U.S. exports. And one could go on and on, depending whether you want to focus on international issues or domestic issues.
You mentioned that economic growth is slowing down in many parts of the world. So the question, if I may ask, is it possible for economy, whether a national economy or a global economy in general, is it possible for it to grow forever? And the other part of the question is whether it is necessary at all.
Well, my answer to the first question is yes, it is possible. The answer to the second question is it necessary? And the answer is it is not necessary, but people have to adapt their expectations to lower growth. In the end, zero growth. We, the world, are much richer today than we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So the issue of poverty has been narrowed greatly, has not gone away, but is narrowed greatly, mainly to parts of Asia and Africa. And so people are much better off. One can imagine a society functioning without any growth, but expectations today are for continued growth. People are not happy if they're not seeing their wages in real terms grow from year to year. So it means a no-growth world economy would mean major changes in expectations. In answer to the first question, can it rotate forever? I know that's controversial. People talk about running out of minerals and things like that. I don't believe it. I think ingenuity will substitute for anything that we begin to run out of. Anything. Brain power is the most important resource in the world. And if we begin to run out of something, we will find substitutes for it. And I have several examples if you're interested.
Yes, please.
We used to use candles for illumination through the 18th century and still today in some parts of the world. Then we discovered whale oil, and in Europe and the US, we whaled out the North Atlantic, and whale oil began to get more expensive, so we went to the South Atlantic and South Pacific, 3-year missions rather than 1 year to get the whale oil. But that's the beginning of the petroleum industry. A chemist, professor of chemistry at Yale University, began to mess around with the nuisance substance called Pennsylvania rock oil, and that was the beginning of the petroleum industry. Not gasoline or petrol, but kerosene. And kerosene began to substitute for whale oil until we discovered how to use electricity. And then, of course, we generate electricity mainly with coal up until recently. So over the years, and another example is copper. The best copper ores 100 years ago were 5% copper, 5%. Now we're down to 0.3% copper. And copper is cheaper in terms of other goods and services today than it was 100 years ago. In the US, we are mining the tailings of non-ferrous metal mines. This is the waste product. The waste of one generation becomes the resource of another generation. And I'm confident that that will continue. So in that respect, I'm an extreme optimist. Brain power will always trump any emerging scarcity.
Therefore, do you mean to say that the current industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, as they call it, is it the answer to the challenges that we are facing or are going to face in the near future?
Well, different people mean different things about the fourth industrial revolution, and
digital, if you prefer that.
We've been using digits since the first industrial revolution. Just our way to use them has changed, and we heard one of the lectures we heard today was on digitization of the Soviet Union and later Russia. I think the big dramatic movements in the next, let's say 20 years, will be in the areas of medicine and agriculture. And they're of course related. We're manipulating materials at the molecular level and developing genetically modified foods and so forth and so on. So yields, I expect, will go up in spite of climate change. Yields will go up, provided we have time, which we do. If we're caught by a sudden change, we're not prepared for it. But if we see it coming, we can prepare for making grains, for example, that use less water, so that when the Eastern Mediterranean becomes drier, as it's expected to do, we will still be able to grow things there, as long as we have time to prepare for it. So I think that the major changes will take place there. I do not expect fusion to succeed in my lifetime, although we've poured billions and billions of dollars into it. I do not expect it to. By succeeding, I don't mean from a scientific point of view, but to produce useful energy or fusion, produce useful energy for you and me, not success, an experiment in the tokamak or whatever it's called. I do not expect quantum computing to be a big breakthrough in my lifetime. Again, there will be advances, but not really huge advances, making it practical to use. So a lot of things are being hyped now. Some, I think the hype is overdone, but basically they're on the right track. And in other areas I've just mentioned too, I think the hype is vastly overdone, and we will not succeed in a practical point of view in the next 2 decades, for example. So, but the thing about science is that you never know exactly what's going to come out at the end. If you look back from the vantage point of 2040, some of the things we're doing now, I say we, the world, will be a mistake. But we don't know that now that it's a mistake. Some of the things will be intellectually interesting. For example, the origins of the universe, but of no practical value. And some of the things will revolutionize the lives of our grandchildren. But it's in the nature of research that you can't tell now which category the research will fall into.
Well, will green economy help in any way to meet the challenges?
The which?
The green economy? Green GDP?
Well, again, there's a semantic question. What exactly do you mean by the green economy? I'm not much in favor of metaphors. From my point of view, from a climate change point of view, the enemy is coal, and we need to should be producing no new coal-fired power plants, and substitute natural gas, which is still a fossil fuel, but about half the greenhouse warming effect is coal, and no pollution. So it's good from a ambient air point of view and from a climate change point of view. I see natural gas as the bridging fuel between now and 2 or 3 decades from now, in which we will depend largely on solar power. Largely, but not entirely. Solar and wind. I see this as a process that's spread over 3 or 4 decades as a whole. And I think the urgent thing now to do is stop building coal-fired power plants, because they will last 40 or 50 years. Once they're built, they will last 40 or 50 years. And we should be backing out coal as rapidly as we can, which the U.S. has been doing, not by policy, but by the emergence of cheap natural gas. China is doing by policy, vigorous nuclear program, vigorous wind and solar programs, LNG importing and importing from Russia, gas from Russia, and to back out coal. But China is still building coal-fired power plants, not only in China, but in the so-called BRI, the Belt and Road countries, and that should, in my view, stop. And China's doing it to provide employment for Chinese, but there are better ways to provide employment than constructing coal-fired power plants. very damaging for the future.
Another question, if I may, relates to the currencies used in the world. Many countries, including this one, are proclaiming once in a while that they are going to stop using the US currency and find some other options for that. For example, in today's interview, our foreign minister mentioned that the BRICS countries should be striving to make settlements amongst them in their local currencies.
So
Do
if
you
you,
think there is
if you want to do it, just do it.
yeah, but
There's
is
no
it
technical,
feasible?
no technical obstacle to doing that.
Right.
If they want to do it, just do it. Stop talking about it. Just do it. And, but my guess is they will find it very difficult to make it widespread. Why? It's like language. Nobody decided to use the English language as the second language around the world. Nobody's decided that. It's a historical path based on the importance of Great Britain and, of course, the British colonies, including America and Canada and Australia. And English is I don't have to tell you, a terrible language to have to learn if you're not a native speaker. Very irregular verbs, very screwy spelling. If we had to choose a conference to choose a language, we've never had such a conference. But if we did, it would probably be Spanish, spoken by many people, but with much simpler spelling and pronunciation than English. But we've never had such a conference. The same is true of the dollar. Nobody decided to use the dollar. It came out of it started after World War I, but it came into its own mainly after World War II, in which countries, including the Soviet Union, were beat up quite badly. Britain was beat up quite badly, and so forth. And the pound sterling, which had been the world currency, was in trouble. The U.S. could create trouble for the dollar, but it would be difficult, I think, to do. Trump, in some sense, is trying. He's not aware of it, but he's trying. But I think it will be very difficult to replace the dollar. That's my own view.
And do you mean that there is no chance that there may someday appear a supernatural currency, for example?
Well, I have advocated for many years the use of the SDR. I've written papers on it. And 10 years ago, the governor of the Central Bank of China said the same thing. And I could have written his speech 10 years ago. The surprise was the source of the speech, not the content of it. But it's just very, very difficult. It's like deciding we would all change our second language from English to Spanish or whatever. It's very difficult, a huge amount of inertia in the system. And many people, having learned English, they don't want to have to learn another language. So you have to start out systematically and wait 2 generations to do it. So I'm not saying the dollar will be the leading currency indefinitely, but certainly for the next 2 or 3 decades, in my view, it will be still the dominant currency. That does not keep individual countries, including Russia and arguably China. China has a program to internationalize the RMB. I don't know how Russia would feel about that, for example. The Chinese would be delighted, in principle, at the foreign ministry level. Foreign ministers should not talk about currencies. They know nothing about them. I say that having served in the State Department many years ago. Foreign ministries know almost nothing about currencies. So you have to talk to the technicians to say, what do we need to do to move in this direction? And it's doable, but it will take a long period of time.
Great. And what would be your advice? how should governments, politicians act to avoid a new financial crisis, which everybody fears these days?
Well, I don't think the financial crisis was due to the use of the dollar, not for a minute.
Yeah.
The financial crisis started in the
Just
US,
percent, yeah.
but it was not due to the use of the dollar abroad. And the financial crisis itself was confined to the US, not including Canada, just the US and Western Europe, Britain, France, Germany, a few countries.
On Russia?
No, the financial crisis. And then it spread as a recession to the whole world, which was very bad for the whole world. But the financial crisis per se, Russia had its own financial crisis. Earlier, in '98, that was before 2008, and later, I learned this morning, actually, yeah. So it had its own financial crisis. Many countries, now Argentina, many countries have had financial crisis, but they were not due to the use of the dollar as a currency for transactions between third countries at all. How to avoid another financial crisis is a topic that's been aired here in this conference in several sessions. And the answer is, we don't know. We are prepared to deal with the last crisis. And we've built many supports to improve the structure of the, not just of the international banking system, addressed to the last crisis. The next crisis will probably not be like the last crisis. And we will not be prepared for it, or in the same way. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time
Yeah.
and for sharing your views.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Good.
Thanks a lot.